Right. So the third kind of prong of today's presentation is going to be the climate outlook, and this is kind of really, I think, the meat and potatoes of today. Hopefully, some of that kind of foundational information was interesting and useful, and it gives you an idea of some of the things that we look at behind the scenes because it is a pretty complex picture, and we only covered off El Nino today. There's a lot more that influences New Zealand's climate, things that happen in the Indian Ocean, the Southern Ocean, the Tasman Sea. All of these things play a role in the climate outlook projections that you're about to see over the back half of this presentation. So I first thought it would be useful to start off with almost a bit of a weather outlook because if you are watching this in mid-November as it is now, and you're kind of seeing quite a bit of soil moisture around, still a lot of moisture around your farm, your fields, there's actually more to come. So it does look like here in mid-November, which takes us through about the 20th of the month, the image that you see on screen. This is one of NIWA's 5-day models, and it looks at rainfall accumulations across the country through about the 20th of November. And it does look like those areas that we were looking at earlier that had some locally drier than normal soils are due for some rain over the coming days. So I'm not seeing any short-term risks for, say, a flash drought or a very unusually dry period kind of developing over the, say, last 7 to 10 days, the back half of November, as we have had and still will continue to have at some level these semi-regular rainfall events, in this case coming in from the Tasman Sea over the course of the weekend and into next week. Now, as we look further out into the future, we kind of have different tools on our belt for different jobs. Uh, Now at NIWA, we have a model that goes out 5 weeks into the future, and that is called NIWA 35. And NIWA 35 is run once a day, and it looks at rainfall patterns and the risk for dryness and drought over the next 5 weeks. And this is a brand new tool that we've worked with MPI to develop over the last 3 years, really on the back of that 2019-20 drought. And it's been a lot of effort and collaboration and input from the sector, from the agricultural sector, forestry, horticulture. There's been a lot of kind of industry engagement toward developing this tool. And now it's out there for everyone to use, and that's really exciting. And it's been a really cool to be a part of this, as it hopefully will keep New Zealand kind of ahead of the game in terms of monitoring risk for dryness and drought, as well as the other side of the spectrum, the risk for heavy rainfall and flooding events, not just this summer, but many summers into the future. So I think this is a very useful tool. If you have not looked at it quite yet, the link is on the top of the slide here, and this tool updates each and every day around 2:30 p.m., give or take, with a very fresh view of the outlook for the next 5 weeks. And when you land on the tool, you're presented with three different scenarios of the potential for either abnormal dryness or meteorological drought over the next 35 days. And the middle scenario is kind of the most likely scenario, so that's kind of a good starting place. And what we see, if you were to go to the drought tool right now, is that there basically is no real risk for meteorological drought to develop over the next 5 weeks. And that's kind of a testament to the recent rainfall that we've had, as well as an expectation at some level for some rain to continue. So it's kind of looking like the risk for dryness and drought this side of Christmas is not that high at the moment. So while we may track, as I kind of go to the bottom right of the slide, in a drier direction in the coming weeks for some regions, the risk for that to culminate in a drought event this side of Christmas does look to be pretty low for much of the country. And I should add that when we look at meteorological drought, it's not just a forward-facing view. What we do is we take in the last 60 days of observations, and then we couple that with the next 35 days of forecast information, because drought is something that develops over a long time period, sustained reduction in rainfall, and then soil moisture, and that affects the hydrological situation. So in order to model that, we have to look back as well as look into the future. And there's a lot of different plots and maps that you can look at on this tool. One of my favorite ones is the week-to-week rainfall trends, which you can see at the bottom right of this slide. And basically it shades, it's an average across each of the next 5 weeks of rainfall as a percentage of normal. And the brown coloring indicates below normal rainfall. The green coloring indicates above normal rainfall. And as we kind of take a step back and look at the next 5 weeks, it's still a bit of a mixed picture out there. I mean, there certainly are some weeks that favor some dryness, as such as week 2 here and week 3, maybe even week 4. But there are some signals across some of those weeks for some moisture as well, some of those that I'm just kind of circling now. So when I look at this, although there are some weeks that certainly do favor dryness, I don't see that, from week 1 through week 5. We do see some variety in there, and that gives me some confidence that, again, we're probably not going to be rushing into, let's say, a meteorological drought this side of Christmas. But it's really, useful to look at this day to day to see the changes and the trends. So definitely bookmark it if you haven't so far. There's another kind of useful utility, I guess, in this tool, and that is the charts that you see on screen, which basically show how this current year, really the last 3 months of this current year, is tracking compared to the last 4 calendar years. So we can kind of see the 2023 trace in red. And then each of those dotted lines indicates a year in the past, the last 4 years. And then we can couple up the recent observation with the forecast for the next 35 days to understand how the current year is tracking with respect to, say, last year or 2019. And that can be really powerful because you know what your area was like this time last year, and to see kind of how the data may sit in with respect to last year or the big dry in 2019 can be a kind of a powerful way of presenting information. So I've just picked 2 kind of regions here that I guess I'm watching as it does look like recent rainfall as well as forecast expectations are a little bit lower than what we've seen in recent years. And that's the New Plymouth District, which you can kind of see how the trace is sitting below the last couple of years, as well as below this teal curve, which represents the normal rainfall over this 3-month period. And similar story for parts of Wairarapa, in this case, Masterton District. You can see how, again, recently it's been drier than the same 3-month period over the last 4 years, and that trajectory does look to continue. So these are just kind of areas to watch as we go ahead. And as I mentioned, these plots are on that drought tool and they update every single day. You can drill down on a sub-regional scale in some cases to see how things are tracking for your particular area. So definitely take advantage of that tool. Right. So now we're going to start to look a little bit further into the future. And to do that, we have a couple of different tools. NIWA's kind of public outlooks are called the Seasonal Climate Outlook. This is the project that I lead and have led over the last several years. And when we look out, in this case, 3 months into the future, it's not about what the weather's going to be like on Christmas Day or Auckland Anniversary weekend. We don't have the ability to do that detailed of forecasting that far in advance. But what we can do is use the climate drivers to understand what broad patterns we may experience with more frequency over the coming months. And that's kind of tied very closely to the El Nino that we were looking at and reviewing earlier. So what you see on screen here is our latest seasonal climate outlook for covering November to January. These update at the beginning, around the start of each month. So we'll be issuing our December to February, the official summer outlook, right around the 1st of December, maybe the 30th of November. And these are free to view, and they contain basically a really detailed breakdown of the climate conditions, why, kind of the why behind the weather. There's a lot of background information in addition to the forecast. So the forecast, we have rainfall on the left, we have temperature on the right, and what we can kind of see is an indication from the guidance that we take in at NIWA for the potential for below normal rainfall for northern and eastern parts of the North Island. So that includes Northland and Auckland, the Waikato, Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, East Cape, Hawke's Bay, and down toward the Wairarapa. Those are the areas that have the highest chance of seeing below normal rainfall over that 3-month period. And when we do climate forecasting, it's not kind of a yes or a no. There's going to be above normal, there's going to be below normal. Because of the uncertainties that exist on those long forecast horizons, we've got to break it down into 3 categories, and that's the chance of being below normal, the chance of being near normal, or the chance of being above normal. So sometimes we don't have the highest level of confidence for a particular region to be a single category. And when that happens, we kind of divide it up into an equal likelihood of 2 categories. And that's what you're seeing here for the Western North Island, the Northern South Island, and the Eastern South Island, where normal or below normal rainfall over that 3-month period is about equally likely. And I guess one of the best techniques to kind of deal with that uncertainty is the idea that above normal rainfall in those regions is pretty unlikely. It's the least likely outcome of the 3. So it may require just a little bit more planning or thinking that if I had normal rainfall, I'd probably be sweet, but if I didn't, I want to be prepared if that happens. So that's kind of the planning and preparation if you're maybe in one of those zones, just to think about. We've seen some areas within those kind of 3 regions track a little bit drier lately, and should that continue, then we may see an escalation of the dryness and potential drought down the line. And the one region that we're pretty confident that rainfall will be above normal is the Western South Island, the Western and Lower South Island, which comprises the West Coast, Southland and Inland Otago, parts of the Canterbury Headwaters and the High Country, the Queenstown Lakes area, Stewart Island. This is an area that during El Nino episodes tends to be wetter than normal, as the Southern Ocean tends to be a very busy place during El Nino episodes with plenty of fronts moving into this area. And in fact, there could be a risk for atmospheric rivers or even heavy rainfall in that region as we go through the months ahead. So we did see one of those in late September. There was the flooding in Gore and parts of Southland, and that could occur again at some point in the months ahead. So that area is kind of the one exception to the other parts of the country where above normal rainfall right now is looking, the chances for that pretty low. Now, as far as temperature goes, we've seen quite a bit of up and down variability in temperature through spring. As we look ahead to summer, what we're seeing is kind of a signal for more northwesterly winds than normal. And you'll see an illustration of that in the next slide. And what that can do is occasionally transport these warm to hot air masses over from Australia, which warm up and dry out as they descend the Central Plateau in the North Island and the Southern Alps in the South Island. And while we haven't seen it yet, there's probably an above average likelihood for temperatures to exceed 35 degrees in those eastern areas at some points during the summer season. Last summer, we didn't actually see a 35-degree temperature in New Zealand, believe it or not. So this year, with the El Nino pattern and probably more westerly winds, those eastern areas could go through some periods where there's maybe elevated heat stress, and some really hot days and nights for that matter. And the indication has been for, originally we were seeing kind of a signal for more southwesterly winds in some of the guidance that we look at. And over time, it's kind of trended more northwesterly, which can potentially introduce more humidity as well as we go into the summer season. So that is something to think about, is that the humidity levels are likely to be on the rise. There'll probably be some spikes in humidity as we go through the season, especially for the North Island, which does sit closer to the tropics. So that is something to think about as well. But when you look at this map, the chance for a summer season that has below normal temperatures, that's the least likely outcome. And when we look at creating these long-term outlooks, we're often looking at pressure patterns in the region. So this map here shows the average pressure pattern, the setup for the summer season, December through February. The red colors indicating higher than normal air pressure, the blue colors indicating lower than normal air pressure. And near New Zealand over the summer season, what we see is a pretty strong signal for a high pressure belt here sitting near and north of the North Island. And the anti-clockwise flow around that high pressure system is what is likely to kind of fuel those northwesterly winds. It kind of working in tandem with this low pressure system that's sitting in the Southern Ocean. So you can kind of start to see why we are favoring the potential for dryness in eastern areas because of the prevailing wind flow pattern. That circulation pattern is really the most important piece of the puzzle to try and get right on a seasonal scale, because if you get that right, chances are your temperature and rainfall forecast will kind of follow. And because of those kind of northwesterly winds, at times our air masses may kind of come down from the Coral Sea. And when that happens, western areas of the South Island, maybe even parts of the top of the South Island, especially Tasman or Nelson westward, and potentially even the lower North Island areas like Taranaki, could be exposed to some of those moisture plumes. So that is kind of a risk, I would say, over the course of the summer season, is that what we could deal with are some pretty dense moisture plumes that do track in from the tropics for especially western areas of the South Island, but not excluding areas that are a little bit farther north as well. And the picture for this is February through April, so taking us through mid-autumn, it generally looks the same. The signal is not quite as strong, but it kind of speaks to that El Nino-like tail favoring this area of high pressure near and north of the North Island into the autumn season. And as we'll see toward the tail end of the presentation, should dryness become a theme, the area that it's kind of most likely to persist in into autumn is, generally speaking, the North Island when we look back at historical El Nino episodes. Now, another kind of key area or key variable that we look at is wind strength. And this summer season, we are seeing a signal for above normal wind speeds. And that is anything shaded in yellow or orange or red on the plots that you see here. So December to February on the left, February to April on the right. And we can really see those orange colors and red colors indicative of seasonal wind strength likely being above normal for large parts of the country. And one of the elements with the wind strength that can quickly potentially lead to dryness is the fact that when we have stronger winds and warmer temperatures, the evapotranspiration rates, the rate at which the water is leaving the ground and leaving the plants into the atmosphere above, those can elevate quite quickly during those windy, hot periods. So this is another thing to consider, is even if rainfall has been kind of marginal and you're tracking maybe all right, if we do get into a windy, hot spell for even 2 weeks, that can really change things in a quick way. So it's something to bear in mind that the information that we're receiving here is suggesting the season could be a bit windier than normal. And from I guess a farming and agricultural perspective, that may mean one thing. On the other side of the spectrum, we could be dealing with some potentially damaging wind events as well through the course of the season. Maybe in the South Island, we saw several of those from about mid-September through a good chunk of October, several episodes of that, and there may be more of that to come. So now, kind of getting closer to the end, we're just going to have a look at what the very latest seasonal climate model guidance is telling us. So each month on the 11th, NIWA takes in data from international forecasting centers all across the globe and brings that into our system, and we basically understand what this means for New Zealand from a rainfall perspective, what you see on screen. So those all those international centers, they each of them produces a forecast, and we consider that forecast kind of as an ensemble, kind of a conglomerate of many different weather models. And we can ask all of those individual weather models how many of these weather models are predicting a drier than normal summer season or a drier than normal February to April season. And what is the percentage number of those models that have that particular outcome? So it's kind of a way of separating really separating out the signal from the noise. So what regions of the country do we need to kind of really focus our attention on from a rainfall perspective for the seasons ahead? And the coloring that you see here indicates the percentage chance or number of ensemble members that are predicting below normal rainfall for each of the periods, December to Feb and Feb to April. And we can kind of see here that, again, it fits kind of the picture that we were looking at earlier, that if dryness, unusual dryness was to occur, the areas that are kind of most favored are those extending from Northland down to about southern Hawke's Bay, maybe into the Wairarapa. That area has about a 50 to 60% chance of seeing below normal seasonal rainfall from December to February. And we do see a continuation of that theme in through the middle part of autumn here. So again, those are the kind of the hot spots that we're seeing on the guidance. But there is still some shading right across the North Island. It's not a particularly high chance. I mean, 40 to 50%, as well as across kind of that northeastern corner of the South Island. But you'll see that, you'll notice that much of the kind of rest of the South Island is blank in this case, which does not indicate a high chance for below normal rainfall for those areas that are white or blank. I'll say that I will add that the kind of the odds for dryness have backed off just a little bit. So one of the useful tools from a climate perspective is to look at last month's guidance and compare it to this month's guidance to understand how things are trending. Are they trending wetter? Are they trending drier? And we kind of have seen just a subtle easing in some of that dry signal for the summer. And again, I don't think it's a reason to be complacent, but I do think that it's kind of signaling that this El Nino is going to be just a little bit different than those ones we've seen in the past, and that's referencing what we looked at earlier. So I would say I think planning and preparedness is still key, but we have just seen kind of a subtle backing off of some of the signals for really, really dry conditions have backed off just a little bit with the most recent run. This just came out on the 11th, so this is actually really fresh information and it hasn't even been considered. We'll be considering this in our summer outlook that we issue for December to February at the end of this month. Similarly, we can look at the chance for rainfall being above normal using that same approach, and you can really see those areas that for both December to February as well as February to April to be on guard or on the lookout for the risk for heavy rainfall events, and that extends from Tasman down through the west coast, even into parts of eastern Otago, not just central Otago. And some of the fronts that do come across from time to time, they could even see some rain spill over the main divide, the Southern Alps, into parts of inland Canterbury, maybe even into eastern Otago. So that speaks to the wind strength being able to transport some of that moisture over the barrier that is the Southern Alps. So it does look like, again, we need to be prepared for the potential for some heavy rainfall events and maybe even flooding in the regions that are shaded in green. And as I mentioned before, it might be hard to see, but even the lower North Island, Taranaki here, is shaded the very first tier of green, and that kind of speaks to the potential for some occasional northwesterly wind flows bringing moisture down from the tropics into the western part of both islands, especially the South Island, but potentially even the North Island. And I think there's about 3 more slides to go. What we have done is looked at all past El Nino episodes dating back to the year 1972. And we created these composites of rainfall patterns for spring on the left, summer at center, and autumn at right. And the different colors, in this case, the orange and red colors, indicate regions that have historically had during past El Nino episodes higher than a 60% chance for a drier than normal summer season or autumn season or spring season during past El Nino episodes. So you can really see that during those past El Nino episodes, the areas that are shaded in red, 8 out of every 10 El Ninos tends to produce below normal seasonal rainfall. So really seeing that across kind of Northland and the Coromandel, East Cape, Gisborne as well, and some shading here for Southern Canterbury as well in the red there. As we go to autumn, you can kind of see how that signal for reduced rainfall kind of contracts and is kind of squeezed up toward the top of the country. So if there are regions that are likely to see the dryness persist into autumn, that is probably the places where you'd want to be focusing your attention. It's up toward the top of the country. And those El Nino events past tend to see some rain start to affect the South Island areas during the autumn season. Really not much of a dry signal there. For the El Nino autumn. So this is a bit of historical context, and there is a document online, if you haven't seen, released from MPI. There was messaging from a variety of sectors, including some climate info, and this is one of the contributions that we provided. Lastly, it would be remiss of me to not chat about the tropical cyclone outlook, as we did have several impactful tropical cyclones, ex-tropical cyclones track near New Zealand last year. During El Nino episodes, there tends to be a higher number of tropical cyclones in the South Pacific Ocean, but oftentimes, New Zealand is a bit sheltered because of that high pressure belt that we were looking at earlier. So while they may form, as they have already, up toward Fiji and Vanuatu, oftentimes New Zealand can be a little bit more shielded from those systems during El Nino episodes because of that strong high pressure belt. I would say that while that is probably a good overarching theme or principle, each individual cyclone is going to maybe encounter different weather patterns that could be occurring near New Zealand when they form. So really each individual event, we need to closely track what the weather is doing in New Zealand at that time to understand if there's a chance that such a feature could kind of track southward. And we've already seen two form this year. And this is there's actually only been 2 other years in the past where we've already had 2 tropical cyclones this early in the season. And that was in 1997 and 1982, which were those historical years that we were looking at earlier. So perhaps not that surprising, some of the similarities. So we do, although New Zealand's risk looks lower year on year compared to last year, we still need to be mindful that there are likely to be quite a high number of tropical systems, anywhere maybe from 9 to 14 from November through April in our region. So it is something to be aware of, despite maybe a slight reduction in risk compared to what we saw last year. Right. So lastly, some key messages that are apparently going out of order. One of our kind of taglines, luck favors the prepared. This is one of the messages we've had in our many of our briefings. I guess failing to plan is preparing to fail, whatever I just said. I think I got it wrong, but failing to plan is playing to fail. That's it. So we know that strong El Nino is underway with impacts lingering up likely until winter 2024. What we've looked at is how this El Nino event is distinctly different from those past El Nino events that we've seen. And therefore, the weather patterns that we experience here in New Zealand are likely to be a little bit different. So we can't just use those past experiences to necessarily guide us through this summer and autumn. There are no major issues yet in terms of dryness, but as discussed, things can change quickly. Don't become complacent. It's not looking like, we're going to see a meteorological drought this side of Christmas. However, there is a sign for some weeks to be drier than normal looking ahead. And as we look to summer, that high pressure belt with the northwest winds, prolonged dry spells will be possible, especially in northern and eastern parts of both islands. But by the same token, occasional northwesterly winds can tap into that tropical moisture and send it into some of the regions, especially there in the western and inland South Island. The stronger than normal winds we discussed, particularly in the South Island and the lower North Island, that can increase the evapotranspiration rates. It can also increase the risk for some of those damaging wind episodes. And those historical El Nino events have seen the signs and signals for dryness linger into the autumn in the North Island. And lastly, we know the average outcome of El Nino, but no El Nino is average. Especially, I think, in the context of a change in climate where we have above average ocean heat basically everywhere. But the predictive guidance and understanding of climate and weather has come a really long way. And in fact, that 1982-83 El Nino event is what kind of triggered a big international push to better understand what El Nino, La Nina, what ENSO means across the globe. So we're really kind of, I think, reaping the rewards of a lot of that work over the last 4+ decades. So the information that we have now is just leaps and bounds ahead of where it was during those past strong events. And lastly, keeping track of forecast updates is critical. So we all have our favorite weather apps. Those are great. There's a lot that I shared today that you may not have known about that may be useful. And as I mentioned, we at NEWA kind of receive these updates in near real time. So, and I understand, I've heard that, certainly maybe you may be hearing something in the media, and sometimes it can be presented in a way that it could sound extreme. So what I kind of would recommend is heading right to some of the primary sources that are available to understand how things are tracking, or send an email out to your friendly forecaster or climate scientist. We're here to help. I know sometimes the headlines can be a little bit frightening. So, by all means, there's a lot of information out there, and you probably know your farm and paddock best. And we're just kind of here to fill in some of the gaps with the weather and climate, and what's to come. So with that, I will end my recording, and I'll